The first sign that something was wrong came when the lights flickered. Jake, a human mechanic living in the off-world colony of New Haven, looked up from his workbench. The glow of his welding torch dimmed, then brightened again. Outside his workshop window, the sky pulsed with an eerie violet hue. "Great," he muttered. "Just what I needed, another power surge." But this was no ordinary electrical problem. His neighbor, a tall, scaled being from the planet Vexus, had warned him about this. The Vexians called it Rixura, the mating season. For weeks, his neighbor, whom Jake simply called Vex, had been preparing, stacking strange glowing crystals around his dome-shaped home. Jake had laughed it off. "So, what, you just glow brighter when you're in the mood?" Vex had hissed in amusement. "You humans are so simple. When Rixura comes, the air sings, the ground trembles, and the weak are left behind." At the time, Jake had assumed it was just alien bravado. Now, as the ground rumbled beneath his feet, he wasn't so sure. A high-pitched screech echoed through the colony. Jake dropped his tools and rushed outside. The violet light in the sky wasn't just atmospheric, it was alive. Swirling tendrils of energy lashed down like lightning, striking near the outskirts of the settlement. Vex's home was glowing fiercely, the crystals pulsing in sync with the sky. But something was wrong. The usually graceful alien was thrashing on the ground, his scales dull and cracked. Jake hesitated. Interfering in an alien's mating ritual was probably a terrible idea. But Vex wasn't just his neighbor, he was a friend. "Hey! You okay?" Jake called, stepping closer. Vex's golden eyes snapped open, filled with pain. "Run, human. They are coming." Before Jake could ask who they were, the ground split open. And something crawled out. Jake stumbled back as the ground trembled. Cracks split the permacrete street, hissing steam rising from below. A long, segmented limb, black and glistening like oil, shot out from the fissure, clawing at the air. Then another. And another. Vex let out a pained hiss, struggling to rise. Not Rixura. Invasion. Jake's blood ran cold. The thing pulling itself from the ground was no Vexian. It was a nightmare, a chittering, multi-legged horror with too many eyes and a mouth that split vertically, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "Okay, nope. Not today." Jake grabbed a metal pipe from his workshop door and swung hard. The creature shrieked as the pipe connected, but it didn't go down. Instead, it lunged, knocking Jake off his feet. He rolled aside just as its jaws snapped where his head had been. Vex let out a furious screech and, with surprising strength despite his weakened state, slashed at the beast with his claws. Black ichor splattered the ground. The creature recoiled, but more were emerging from the cracks. "Jake!" Vex rasped. "The crystals, destroy them." Jake blinked. "You're mating crystals." "Why?" "They are not ours." Vex snarled. "They are baits. The cricks brood, they mimic our signals, lure us into weakness, then swarm." Jake cursed. Of course. The glowing crystals weren't part of the ritual, they were a trap. Another crix lunged at them. Jake swung the pipe again, this time aiming for the glowing nodules on its back. The creature spasmed as the light flickered out. "Go!" Vex shoved him toward the house. "Break them all." Jake didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted toward Vex's dome, where the crystals pulsed ominously. Behind him, the screeches of more cricks filled the air. The entire colony was under attack. He grabbed the nearest crystal, warm and vibrating in his grip, and smashed it against the ground. The light inside flared, then died. A distant screech echoed, as if in pain. One down. Too many left. Jake grabbed another, then froze. A shadow loomed in the doorway. A Crix, larger than the others, its armored body covered in glowing veins, stared at him with cold, insectoid eyes. It hissed. Jake tightened his grip on the pipe. "All right, ugly," he muttered. "Let's dance." The massive Crix lunged. Jake barely dodged, feeling the rush of air as jagged mandibles snapped shut where his shoulder had been. He swung the pipe with all his strength, clang, but the creature's armored hide barely dented. It hissed, its glowing veins pulsing brighter. Behind him, more Crix skittered into the dome, drawn by the remaining crystals. Jake was surrounded. Then, boom! A plasma torch blast seared past Jake's ear, hitting the lead Crix square in its gaping maw. The creature screeched, thrashing as its head erupted in sparks and smoke. Jake turned. Vex stood in the doorway, one arm hanging limp, the other gripping a stolen mining torch. His golden eyes burned with fury. "Human! Move!" Jake dove aside as Vex unleashed another blast, incinerating two more Crix. The air filled with the stench of burning chitin. "Since when do you use human tools?" Jake yelled, scrambling up. "Since today," Vex snarled, tossing him a second torch. "Now burn them all. No more hesitation." Jake grabbed the torch and turned it on the nearest crystal cluster. The moment the plasma touched the glowing stone, it detonated in a shockwave of violet light, sending Crix screeching and scattering. Outside, the colony was in chaos. Humans and aliens alike ran for cover as Crix poured from every crack in the ground. The false Rixura signal had drawn them like moths to a flame, and now the entire settlement was under siege. Jake and Vex fought their way to the comms tower at the center of town. If they could shut down the remaining crystal transmitters, maybe they could cut off the signal luring the Crix. A group of human miners and a few other Vexians had formed a desperate barricade near the tower. "Jake!" shouted Mara, the colony's medic. "What the hell is happening? These things faked the mating season." Jake yelled over the noise. "They're using the crystals as a homing beacon." One of the Vexians let out a horrified hiss. "A brood ambush, clever. And deadly." Vex nodded grimly. "We must destroy the central transmitter. Or none of us survive the night." A fresh wave of Crix surged toward them, their chittering filling the air. Jake tightened his grip on the plasma torch. "Then let's get to work." The barricade wouldn't hold much longer. Jake could hear the splintering of metal as the Crix threw themselves against the makeshift wall. Their shrieks cut through the chaos like knives. Across the colony, fires burned where plasma torches and mining charges had been used in desperate defense. Mara wiped soot from her face, her medical kit now holding more weapons than bandages. "The central transmitters in the old mining shaft," she shouted over the noise. "But it's crawling with those things." Vex hissed, his injured arm twitching. "Then we go through them." Jake checked his plasma torch, half charge left. Not enough. He grabbed a discarded shock baton from the ground. It would have to do. "All right," he said, "we hit hard, we hit fast. Take out the transmitter, and maybe these things lose their coordination." The group moved as one, humans with torches and tools, Vexians with claws bared. The moment they broke from cover, the Crix swarmed. Jake's world became a blur of violence. He swung the shock baton in wide arcs, feeling the crackle of electricity each time it connected with chitinous flesh. A Crix lunged at his side, only to be ripped apart by Vex's claws. They fought their way toward the mining shaft step by bloody step. The entrance yawned like a wound in the earth, pulsing with that same unnatural violet light. Then Jake saw it. At the center of the shaft, a massive crystal cluster throbbed like a heartbeat. But this was no Vexian stone, it was something else, something alive. Tendrils of light connected it to smaller crystals scattered throughout the colony. And around it, the largest Crix Jake had seen yet stood guard, its armored body covered in glowing veins. "That's their queen," Mara breathed. Vex's spines flared in recognition. Not just queen. Puppet master. The realization hit Jake like a punch. The Crix weren't just attacking, they were being controlled. The central crystal was coordinating them, turning what should have been mindless beasts into an organized swarm. The queen's head snapped toward them. A dozen glowing eyes focused. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in images that flooded Jake's mind, visions of the colony burning, of humans and Vexians falling, of the Crix spreading to other worlds. A warning. A threat. Jake gritted his teeth. "Yeah, no. We're not letting that happen." He raised his torch. The queen screeched, and the swarm attacked. The moment Jake raised his plasma torch, the Crix queen unleashed a psychic scream that made his vision blur. His knees buckled as alien images flooded his mind, cities burning, worlds crumbling, a galaxy consumed by the swarm. Vex grabbed his shoulder, claws digging in. "Focus, human. Its mind tricks are weak against your kind." Jake shook his head, fighting the vertigo. The queen was broadcasting fear directly into their brains, but Vex was right, human minds weren't as susceptible as Vexians. Where the scaled aliens staggered, the humans held firm. Torches on full. Jake yelled. "Aim for the central crystal." The assault team charged forward. Plasma fire lit up the cavern as they carved a path through the screeching Crix. The queen scuttled backward, her many legs tapping against the stone in a rapid, panicked rhythm. Mara went down first, a Crix warrior sinking its fangs into her leg. Jake turned to help, but Vex was faster, his claws severed the creature's head in one smooth motion. "Go!" Vex snarled. "We'll cover you." Jake didn't hesitate. He sprinted the last 20 meters toward the pulsating central crystal, dodging snapping mandibles and slashing limbs. The queen reared up before him, towering 3 meters tall, her underbelly glowing with the same violet light as the crystal. Then something unexpected happened. As Jake raised his torch to strike, the queen hesitated. A new image flashed in his mind, not of destruction, but of desperation. A dying world. A starving swarm. A species just trying to survive. The crystal wasn't a weapon. It was a last hope. Jake's hand wavered. Behind him, Vex screamed a warning. Jake froze, the plasma torch humming in his grip. The queen's massive form loomed over him, but she made no move to attack. Instead, another wave of images flooded his mind, barren wastelands, crumbling hives, Crix young withering away from some unseen sickness. Not invaders. Refugees. Behind him, the battle raged on. Vex was locked in combat with 2 Crix warriors, his scales slick with their black blood. The remaining humans and Vexians were barely holding their ground. "Jake! Do it now!" Vex bellowed. The queen's mandibles quivered. She took a single step back, exposing the glowing crystal core beneath her armored chest. Not a challenge, a surrender. Jake's finger hovered over the torch's trigger. One shot would end this. The colony would be safe. But the images kept coming, the truth. The Crix weren't attacking out of malice. Their world was dying, and they'd latched onto the Vexian mating signals in desperation, mistaking them for something else. Something that could save them. A terrible understanding dawned on Jake. The crystals weren't bait. They were medicine. With a sudden movement, Jake lowered his torch. He reached out slowly, keeping eye contact with the queen. Her many lenses focused on him, unblinking. "Jake, what are you doing?" Mara screamed from across the cavern. He ignored her. "You don't want to fight," he said aloud, knowing the queen could sense his intent if not his words. You need help. The Queen tilted her massive head. The psychic assault lessened, replaced by something quieter, questioning. Around them, the other Cricks paused, sensing their Queen's hesitation. Vex staggered forward, bleeding from multiple wounds. Human, have you lost your mind? Kill it before. No, Jake said firmly. He turned to face his friend. They're not what we thought. They're dying, Vex. And we just became their last hope. The cavern fell eerily silent. Even the distant sounds of battle outside seemed to fade. The Queen remained perfectly still, watching. Waiting. Vex's golden eyes narrowed. Then, slowly, he extended his claws, not to attack, but to examine the nearest crystal. His nostrils flared as he sniffed at its surface. By the old gods. He whispered. These aren't our signals. They're, please. The truth hung heavy in the air. The colony had a choice now: finish the slaughter, or try something no one had ever attempted before. Jake took a deep breath. Let's talk. The colony's survivors gathered in the ruined square as the first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon. Jake stood between Vex and the Cricks Queen, his clothes stained with soot and blood. Around them, humans and Vexians clutched their weapons nervously, while the remaining Cricks clicked and chittered in the shadows. Mara was the first to break the silence. You're saying we should just help them? Her voice trembled with disbelief. After everything they've done? The Queen shuddered, sending another pulse of images, not just of her dying world, but of the attack itself. The confusion. The fear. The Cricks had been desperate, half-mad from starvation, latching onto the Vexian signals like drowning creatures grasping at driftwood. Vex let out a long hiss. We thought it was a trick. But it was a tragedy. He turned his golden eyes to Jake. You saw the truth when the rest of us saw only enemies. Jake shook his head. I almost didn't. He still felt the weight of the plasma torch in his hand, remembered how close he'd come to firing. The colony's governor, an older human with a grizzled beard, stepped forward. Even if we wanted to help, how? We're barely surviving out here ourselves. The Queen reacted instantly. One of her forelimbs twitched, and a smaller Cricks skittered forward, depositing something at the governor's feet, a chunk of unrefined ore, glinting with rare minerals. Then another. And another. Vex inhaled sharply. The old mines. They've been gathering resources we thought were depleted. A murmur ran through the crowd. The Cricks weren't just refugees, they were miners by nature, able to reach deposits no human or Vexian could. What had begun as a fight for survival could become something else entirely. Jake felt the mood shift. The fear didn't vanish, but something new took root alongside it: possibility. The governor picked up one of the ore samples, studying it in the growing light. When he spoke again, his voice was different. All right. We'll try it your way. He nodded to the Queen. Truce? The great creature dipped her head in what could only be a bow. As the sun rose fully over New Haven, something remarkable happened. A Vexian child, barely knee-high, wriggled free from its parents' grasp and toddled toward the nearest Cricks worker. Before anyone could react, the child patted the creature's armored leg, and the Cricks responded by gently offering a small, glowing crystal like a gift. Laughter broke out. Nervous at first, then genuine. Jake exhaled, feeling the tension leave his shoulders. It wouldn't be easy. There would be distrust, setbacks, challenges. But for the first time since the lights had flickered all those hours ago, he dared to hope. Vex clapped a clawed hand on his shoulder. Only a human, he said wryly, would see monsters and think neighbors. Jake grinned. Yeah, well. Someone had to be the smart one. Above them, the sky burned clear and blue, the last traces of violet fading like a bad dream. The future was waiting.